born idea.
He said, I'm thinking I might buy myself a B-17 and put it over a gas station.
To sell burgers and fuel.
People were lined up for blocks to get in, 30,000 gallons a day.
Decades later, a dad's dying wish.
Art wanted us to restore it to flying condition.
A family's flight of fancy.
They're foolish to be trying this.
That's totally the bomb.
Are you ready to take the controls, Jamie?
Are you ready for me to take the controls?
You better do it, because we're heading towards the water.
I'm Jamie Colby, today driving through Salem, Oregon, one of the final destinations of settlers on the Oregon Trail. I'm here to piece together an inheritance story that revolves around a wild bar bet, a crazy roadside attraction, and a sky-high tale of guts and gumption.
My name is Punky Scott. When my father passed away, he left me a massive, corroding World War II bomber that he acquired in a most bizarre adventure.
I meet Punky at this airplane hangar. Hi, I'm Jamie.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for coming today.
Inside isn't a plane, but rusted out hunks of metal. Disheveled stacks of doors and flaps. Damaged pieces strewn about. What is all this?
These are all B-17 parts.
The B-17 bomber?
B-17 bomber known as a Flying Fortress.
This is an inheritance?
This is my inheritance.
I have got to learn more about who would have left you this. That would be Art Lacey, Punky's father, and a character for the ages. During World War II, the amateur pilot joins the Army Corps of Engineers and works stateside on military fortifications along the Pacific.
They were looking for someone who was knowledgeable about the coast range, and my dad was very, very helpful.
In 1944, Art opens up a gas station outside Portland, Oregon. And when the war's over, he wants to rev it up.
He was very ambitious and intuitive about what customers would really like to have.
What he thinks they really want to have is not just gas, but an experience. The eureka moment comes when Art learns that Altus Army Airfield in Oklahoma is selling surplus warplanes. B-17 bombers, to be precise.
He said, you know, I've been kicking around the idea of getting a World War II bomber and using it as a centerpiece for a gas station.
Jason Scott is Art's grandson.
He thought, I can end up with a canopy, but I'll also have a roadside attraction and I'll draw people to the facility.
Art sets his sights on the right plane, says Rob Collins, who runs a foundation that organizes living history events featuring warplanes like the B-17.
It's got a 104-foot wingspan, that's 75 feet long, and it has nearly 5,000 horsepower. When this thing was first produced, it was one of the biggest airplanes ever to take to the skies.
Was it very valuable in combat missions?
Yes, heavy bombers, strategic bombers were the most valuable asset that we had.
So, America builds more than 12,000 B-17s, which drop more than 500,000 tons of bombs over enemy territory. Each plane costs about 200 grand. But the government heavily discounts them in a post-war garage sale.
Once the war was over, these were just obsolete. So they were basically cutting these things up as scrap.
So anyone, you give them your cash and you walk off with a plane?
We didn't need them. There was going to be no more war. World War II ended it all, right?
It's at his 34th birthday party in 1947 when Art blurts out his cockamamie scheme to buy one of those B-17s.
He was with all his cronies and they were having a few adult beverages. One of the guys said, well, Art, there's no way in heck you can do that. That's just not going to happen.
Well, that was definitely the wrong thing to ever tell him, because he was going to prove you wrong until the day he died. And he said, I'll bet you $5 I can do it.
When the alcohol wears off, he doesn't say to himself, oh my God, what was
Never. Never in his whole career.
He sounds like he was a little eccentric.
He was a wild child, yes.
The wild child scrapes up 15 grand and hops the first flight to Oklahoma.
You know, my grandmother never actually admitted whether she thought he was nuts or had lost it.
the flight back would not go so smoothly.
He slid it across the runway, and he crashed it into another parked B-17.
In March 1947, gas station owner Art Lacey shows up at Altus Army Airfield in Oklahoma, cash in hand, to purchase a surplus World War II bomber and fly it back to Portland, Oregon.
He said, I'm thinking I might buy myself a B-17 and put it over a gas station.
So what happened when he said, hey, I'm here to buy a B-17?
It was all controlled by the War Assets Administration officer, and he was able to strike a deal on the plane. It was $13,750.
But there's a hitch.
He didn't know how to fly any aircraft that had more than one engine, and a B-17 has 4. He also needed to have a co-pilot, and he didn't have one.
So, in Art's telling, he just wings it.
He said it looked like it was about a mile off where the tower was, and nobody could tell what was going on.
He slid it across the runway, and he crashed it into another parked B-17.
Art slumps back to the airfield commander, who Art discovers really wants to get rid of these planes.
He said, worst case of wind damage I've ever seen, and wrote that plane and the one he crashed into off as wind damage.
And then the fellow that was in charge said, can you come up with any more money? And he said, I have $1,500 left in my name in the world. That's it.
Deal. A new bill of sale is typed up, and Art's given the title and keys to another Flying Fortress. Number 4485790. This time, Art calls in some pilot buddies to help get the thing home. It must have been some trip, says Rob Collins. Turns out, the Collins Foundation owns a B-17 too.
All right, are you ready to take the controls, Jamie?
Are you ready for me to take the
You better do it, because we're heading towards the water.
Oh, that's not good.
Rattling around in the noisy aluminum cockpit, I see that Art's 1,800-mile trip from Altus to Oregon is no easy flight.
You might want to push the nose forward a little bit, see how we're climbing up. We went up about 500 feet.
So back and forth is nose up or down.
Yeah. We might make a left turn here. Feel for it.
You know this is my first time flying.
Really? You're doing a great job.
Of course, I have perfect flying weather, unlike Art's crew.
They got caught in a terrible snowstorm, and all of a sudden they see a mountain right in front of them. Fortunately, didn't crash.
Sounds like a movie of the week.
It does.
Did you ever doubt the story your dad told?
No, he would embellish, but he always was a pretty truthful man.
This much is indisputable. Art does fly the B-17 all the way to Oregon. There, he faces another hurdle. How in the world to get the 100-foot wide plane the last 20 miles from the airport to his property? Can't just drive the beast down the road, or can you?
He told the trucking company, no matter what happens, you just keep on going.
In 1947, Art Lacey lands this recently purchased B-17 bomber in Portland, Oregon, planning on using the warplane as a canopy over a new set of gas pumps. But first, he has to figure out how to get the massive aircraft to his property.
He had to take it apart and put it on trucks, but they wouldn't give him any permits because it was still too big. And so he decided he was going to do it anyway.
In the middle of the night, Art sneaks his partially dismantled B-17 out onto the highway.
He told the trucking company that was moving it, no matter what happens, you just keep on going, and I'll pay any tickets that you get. Made it all the way out there with no problem at all.
Local officials are not amused.
He was in trouble, but of course the sentiment right after the war was very patriotic. A woman justice of the peace took sympathy on what was going on, and so she fined him $10.
4 months later, Art opens his new bomber gas station with his shiny B-17 canopy. Word soon spreads about the unusual attraction.
his business boomed, and people were lined up for blocks to get in. And in order to keep people in line, we would give them free Coke floats, and we would wash every windshield. And we pumped a lot of gasoline.
Then Art opens a second B-17 themed business right across the lot, the Bomber Restaurant. He decorates its walls with World War II photos and memorabilia.
I was very popular with all my friends. I had an airplane out in front and a cool place to fix meals.
Did he ever get an offer to sell the plane?
Oh, all the time.
Big numbers?
$1 million.
Rumors spread that Paraguayan rebels and rich collectors are making the seven-figure offers. Art says it's not for sale.
That's a lot more than he paid.
But it was his sign of his business.
A business that's making money hand over fist.
At one time, he was the largest volume, single-unit gasoline station in the world, 30,000 gallons a day.
For all his nuttiness, he was a smart
He
businessman.
very much was, so.
But by the late 1980s, the business of owning an independent gas station is getting tougher. Art's mom and pop pumps can't compete with the big corporate chains, even with a B-17 overhead. So in 1991, Art, now 78, closes down the Bomber gas station after 44 years of operation.
It broke his heart, but that was part of a business that just had to happen.
Art keeps his Bomber up as a symbol of the restaurant. But after 4.5 decades exposed to the elements, the warplane is starting to look like she just came out of battle. Corroded fuselage, busted parts, even graffiti. Maybe it's finally time to send old number 4485790 to the scrap heap. As he tries to figure out what to do, Art learns something that really troubles him. Of all those B-17s built to win World War II, 12,000 of them, fewer than 50 have survived.
We're literally down to a handful of these planes remaining in the world.
So, battle plans are drawn up to restore the bomber to full flight-worthy condition.
Over the years, I really think it got to his heart. He loved that aircraft. And he always talked about the veterans and how they valiantly served our nation, and that aircraft stood for that.
The Collings Foundation has restored several World War II bombers. Rob Collings knows firsthand what Art is up against.
Is it realistic, and what's involved?
It's monumental. I would say to a degree they're foolish to be trying this.
What are we talking about in terms of time and money?
I would say about 97,000 man hours. You equate that into one person working, that would be about 54 years of work to do, and tens of millions of dollars.
But Art is once again ready to wing it, intent on taking the controls of his Flying Fortress before he pulls into that big filling station in the sky. To officially kick off the restoration, Art finally gives his plane a name, christening her the Lacey Lady.
We were cheering, and we were taking pictures, and we were playing loud music. It was a lot of fun.
But this time, Art won't see his wild scheme through. In April 2000, he dies of heart failure at age 87. And his family inherits the daunting challenge of restoring the B-17.
I mean, we are restaurateurs and caterers, not airplane manufacturers. You can't just go down the store and buy the parts.
The family of Art Lacey is determined to restore the broken-down World War II B-17 bomber they've inherited and get her back in the air.
There were probably a few people who wondered that, maybe we're crazy. But it represents a great era for our country, and we need to take care of it. Did he leave money to do that?
Well, yes and no. At the time, we had to remove all our underground storage tanks from the old gas station, and we had to put almost $600,000 into that.
The environmental regulations take a big chunk of the money Art left behind. The family quickly burns through another $400,000 on costly restorations. At some point, did you realize this was going to cost more than you actually had in your pocket?
Yes, I was somewhat naive. The money that our family had put into it was just going to not go all that far.
It was more than we could take on by ourselves. I mean, we are restaurateurs and caterers, not airplane manufacturers.
So the family creates a nonprofit foundation called the B-17 Alliance. To their amazement, interest in the bomber quickly takes off.
Our volunteers went from 10 volunteers to over 100 volunteers.
People out of the blue show up and say, hey, this is a great project and I want to be a part of it.
Those 97,000 man-hours suddenly seem possible. Donors show up in force, too.
We just finished a campaign to raise $50,000 in 2 months, and we were successful. That's really exciting.
To date, they've raised nearly $500,000, enough to move the Lacey Lady to a restoration facility. But they'll need much more than that to get the plane back in the skies.
It's a lot of money to restore a B-17 bomber. You can't just go down the store and buy the parts.
Then another really big break.
Just recently, we had an aerospace manufacturing company that approached us. They said, we are prepared to donate materials and to build parts free of charge for the duration of the project.
A gift potentially worth millions. So what kind of condition is the Lacey Lady in today? I get a sneak peek at the progress Art's heirs have made.
This is the first section that was restored, and this is the navigator and bombardier's compartment.
How long did this take?
This took us about 3.5 years and about $350,000.
This ball turret, one of the dozen machine gun stations, has also been restored.
This one cost about $25,000 and it's taken a couple of years.
The current focus, the bomber's 100-foot wingspan.
Are these ever going to be flyworthy?
Absolutely. They will definitely be flight worthy and reassembled to the fuselage.
It's a great start, but the family still has a long journey ahead.
How many years do you think this will take?
It's at least a 10-year project.
How much money is this going to cost?
We estimate the project to be about $6 million on the aircraft itself. And then in order to build a permanent home and museum for the aircraft, about $3 million.
That's right. The family plans on using the Lacey Lady as the centerpiece of a museum dedicated to the legacy of World War II heroes. In fact, they've already created a temporary one here on site.
We're still a little bit grassroots, but last year we had over 15,000 visitors.
What is your hope for the restoration?
I fully expect to see it flying around our country, telling the story of our country and the sacrifices of our veterans. Hopefully, I'm still around when that is completed.
A legendary warplane helps preserve freedom, becomes the icon for a small-town business, and is now inspiring Americans once again.
What's Dad thinking?
I talk to my dad every day, and it's so important to him and to our whole family that this happened. It was a dream of his, and we've carried it on, and it's coming along beautifully.
Since it may be a while before Punky and her family get their B-17 airworthy, we thought we'd leave you with a look at another one of the dozen or so B-17s still flying. In June 2016, a dozen World War II B-17 veterans, all in their 90s, met at the Boeing Airfield in Seattle to take to the skies. The vets recalled the beating the planes took on combat missions over Europe. One vet said, "We brought some back so badly butchered up, they never flew again. But they got us home." I'm Jamie Colby. Thanks for watching Strange Inheritance. And remember, you can't take it with you.